Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Get a lateral flow test. That's what the government tells us. If you want to go to a New Year's Eve party, a football match, to protect your family, to go to work, the trouble is, everywhere's run out of kits. Are they to blame for this fiasco? We'll look at former British colony of Hong Kong, where one of the last bastions of free speech has been, you guessed it, closed down. What does it mean for Hong Kong's future? And joining me on Talking Pints, YouTube creator Maya Toosey. But first, the news.
Good evening, I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest headlines. A woman who claims she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and abused by the Duke of York says others must be held accountable. That follows Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction for sex abuse. Virginia Giuffre is bringing a civil case now against Prince Andrew for alleged sexual assault. He denies any wrongdoing. 60-year-old Maxwell now faces life in jail after she was found guilty of 5 out of 6 charges for helping Epstein sexually abuse girls.
It sends a message also to other sexual predators and to those who would assist them in sex trafficking that you may face similar charges one day in a court of law in the United States. You may be convicted and you may face the rest of your life in prison, as may be the case now with Ms. Maxwell.
Well, the Welsh Government is loaning 4 million lateral flow tests to England as the number of COVID cases continues to climb. The latest figures show 11,452 people are in hospital with the virus. That's up 61% from a week earlier, and it's the highest number since February the 26th. There's been a rise in demand for tests as people try to comply with advice to limit the spread of the Omicron variant. Meanwhile, the NHS is due to set up Nightingale Hospital surge hubs in England to prepare for increasing cases of Omicron. Work on 8 hubs holding up to 100 patients each will start this week. The NHS is also ramping up the use of virtual wards at home, where patients get monitoring technology and regular check-ins with clinicians. Transport and Southern Rail has confirmed none of its trains will run to or from London Victoria until January the 10th because of COVID-related staff shortages. It's set to severely disrupt passenger services at one of the UK's busiest stations. Southern connects locations such as Brighton, Eastbourne and Portsmouth. Cross Country is also urging customers to avoid travelling on New Year's Eve because of a planned strike. Here, from January, insurers will no longer be able to charge existing customers more to renew than they would if they were new customers. It follows a review by the Financial Conduct Authority that found many insurers were increasing prices for renewing customers in a practice known as price walking. The new rules are expected to save consumers £4.2 billion over the next 10 years. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
Good evening. Go and get a lateral flow test. That's the message if you want to go to a social event. That is absolutely the message if you're doing anything tomorrow night, because, of course, it is New Year's Eve. It's going to be party time as people travel into England from Wales, from Scotland, and we're encouraged to actually go out and celebrate. It's also actually rather important for workplaces. Here, for example, at GBNews, I've been doing a lateral flow test every day before I come in to work because we want to try and keep the station on air. So it's important for that, but it's also important, we're told, to make sure we keep on protecting our vulnerable family members. Indeed, lateral flow tests, in many ways, are the centrepiece of England's strategy of not having more restrictions in the way that Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have. And when that message goes out Surprise, surprise. Guess what happens? There's a surge in demand. And at the moment, roughly 900,000 lateral flow tests are being used every day. But demand for that tomorrow is going to be significantly higher. And as a result of this, guess what? There are shortages being reported absolutely everywhere in England. And indeed, in Scotland, people are waiting up to 5 days for the result of PCR tests. Now, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has ordered 300 million new lateral flow tests, which sounds great. But it makes me wonder, why didn't we put orders in for lateral flow tests before we decided that we weren't going to put restrictions in place in England, that we were going to encourage people to get lateral flow tests as often as possible? To me, it's all because there is no forward planning. To me, it's all because this is a government operating on day-to-day tactics with no overall strategy. Yes, I know dealing with a pandemic is difficult, but this really is a mess. And frankly, Sajid Javid on this just looks all at sea. Now, Wales, like the cavalry, have come over the hill and they're offering us 4 million lateral flow tests. Just how quickly they can be distributed around the rest of England is a question we'll ask this evening. But the whole thing, frankly, has very rapidly become a fiasco. And my question for you tonight, is the government to blame for this fiasco, in your opinion? Let me know what you think. GBViews at GBNews.uk, or you can tweet at GBNews. Well, my view is pretty clear. It is a shambles. Now, let's go to the front lines of this. Let's find out what it's really like out there. And I'm now joined by London-based GP Mo Kaki from North London. Mo, good evening.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Yeah, good to see you. So obviously there's been an upsurge in demand. The government have encouraged it and created it. How much forward planning for this did you see in a GP's practice?
Well, I mean, we had no prior warning to it, of course, and I have the fortune of working both in hospital and in general practice. And what I've seen is that there is a huge shortage of these lateral flow tests, as everyone's mentioned, but that was sprung on us just a few days before Christmas, New Year's. Everything's coming up and everyone wants to be safe and we want to see our family and friends for the first time in a long time. And so many people can't get hold of one, and it's really put people out of kilt here.
Yeah, and I guess tomorrow night, I mean, it is New Year's Eve. We weren't allowed to celebrate last year, and I know there have been, for example, the fireworks have been cancelled by Mayor Khan in London, but I think people have got, fairly substantial plans tomorrow. I'm guessing a lot of people just won't be able, as you see it, to get a lateral flow test before attending a social event.
That's right. I mean, I was helping out at a pharmacy recently just because of a shortage, and 20 to 25 people came in with codes saying, look, I want to pick up a lateral flow test. There weren't any. Speak to the pharmacist, they said, we don't have any. We can't get any. We don't know when they're going to come. So many people are desperate for it. They want to do the right things. They want to protect their families. They want to look after their loved ones. They want to look after themselves. They don't want to spread it. But you look at it and it's so complex. I mean, look at it from that pharmacy perspective. You've got COVID positive potential patients coming in, asking, arguing, getting aggressive, saying, I want my lateral flow, I need to know. You've got NHS workers also affected. If you are in contact or have a positive test, you're off for 10 days. But if you are able to have a lateral flow on the 6th and 7th day and they're negative, you can come back to work. But if there's no tests available, how can you do that? And so we're looking at an even more depleted workforce.
And I guess also, for most people, as you say, that change from 10 days to 7 days has put yet more demand on the system, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, we welcome that, especially as someone who works in the NHS at such a busy time. We would really want that support. We want our healthcare workers to come back as soon as they can. And they're desperate to make an effort and help as passionate as they are to help during this crisis. But it's such a challenge. And without those lateral flow tests, it's a real struggle. Of course, we're still encouraging the normal things, trying to reduce your socialization, trying to make sure you're wearing your mask, get your booster vaccinations. But ultimately, if the government makes a mandate to get lateral flow tests and there aren't any, that's really short-sighted.
Yeah, I can see some quite significant rows happening at venues tomorrow night where they're demanding negative tests to be shown and people just aren't going to have them. How, in terms of the pharmacy where you worked, and I guess they really are in the front line of this in high streets up and down the country. I mean, you said a moment ago, did they literally not have any idea when their next delivery was going to be?
That's right. I mean, it's my father's pharmacy, and there was, as you know, the Omicron virus is flying around. Some of the staff got it. There was no one in. I happened to be on the day off, so I came in and worked as a cashier for the day, which was great. And all we saw was hordes of people coming in. They have their codes. They want to come and help out, but they can't do anything about it. There are no supplies. We have none left in stock. And you contact, and nobody is saying when they're going to come back in. So it's a real challenge. And this was the case for all the pharmacies around the area. We had people calling in saying, look, I have called 4 or 5 places. I've gone to the library. I've done whatever else has been advised by Sajid Javid, but I can't get them.
Well, I have to say thank you, Mo, for giving us that front-line testimony of what it's really like out there. Thank you for joining us here on GB News. Well, I mentioned the point there about supply, and my next guest is Richard Bartlett, who is a supply chain expert at ClearNow, a digital platform for customs and supply chain logistics. So, Richard Bartlett, good evening. Welcome to the show. There we had the pharmacist, or at least the son of the pharmacist, telling us they've run out of LFTs. They have absolutely no idea when the next lot's being delivered. In your view, is the problem, and yeah, we know there's increased demand, is the problem here one of actual physical availability, or is it one of distribution?
Good evening, Nigel. I think it's a matter of a few things. Let's be honest here. The government have been going on and on and on for the last few months about the lateral test, making sure you're taking your test, etc. Supply chain's all about making sure in a supply chain network you have plenty of time to plan. And what's happening, and I think you made the comment earlier, Nigel, that it seems like they just turn the tap on and then they want everything to happen. So one hand they're telling you one thing, and the supply chain doesn't work like that. These lateral flow tests, he's ordered 300 million. Surely they should have been thinking about this. He has Dr. Gloom on every day on the scientists saying that, we're going to have a huge increase. And unfortunately with Omicron, obviously we've seen that. But you would think they would plan this ahead. You've got to be planning 2-3 months ahead of yourself. If you look at the manufacturer, they talk to a manufacturer who's now ramping up. Surely you'd be talking to him in August to say, we need this over a certain period of time. It's winter time. We've been talking about the problems in winter time. Let's have a floor for the next 6 months. Unless I'm missing something.
I mean, over 2 weeks ago, Boris was using the word emergency, so that didn't come out of the blue. So for you, I mean, tell us right now how you see things ahead of New Year's Eve tomorrow, and do you think that the 4 million test kits rather, that have been offered by the Welsh Government, is there much chance in 24 hours of getting those distributed?
I think they'll do the best. I think they'll do the best to try and do that. I can't see it really happening. You may get 1 million, 1.5 million, but doesn't it put a lot of pressure on the consumer out there that, they're worried? I had my test yesterday. Unfortunately, I've got COVID and I've tested, but I had the same problem. I went onto the PCR to try and get it. Could I get it? Nothing. I can't get it anywhere. I've been logging on everywhere. And that's the problem. I mean, 4 million is great from the Welsh Government to offer this supply. But again, we're 2 days ahead. We're 1 day ahead of one of our busiest, years of the year. Unfortunately, I'm going to be sat at home watching the TV. Probably watching you, Nigel.
Bad luck. No, I'm going to be out having a drink too, don't worry.
Oh, yeah, right.
And I will think of you. I promise, Richard, I will think of you. Stuck there.
Yeah, thanks for that. But yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. I mean, and Sajid, they've got to really start thinking about this. We've already seen fuel crisis. We've seen with supply chain crisis. We've seen so many things now rearing its ugly head every month. And this is the worst one when you think about it, because people need to feel safe. They need to want to go out and feel safe. They want to be able to do the right thing, which we're being asked to do. And they're being stopped that. And that's a real worry, I think. And the government really needs to address this going forward.
A deeper question. During the Brexit referendum in 2016, one of the big debates was about supply chains. And it was argued by the Remainers that the just-in-time supply chain could be affected by our withdrawal from the European Union. And that led for the first time ever, I think, to a debate about the just-in-time supply chain. Do you think the model we've got actually works, or is it too vulnerable to breaking down, whether it's weather, unforeseen circumstances? Is there a different way we could do this? Or are the commercial pressures on firms like yours just so great that this really is the only option?
I think this is a difficult one, and obviously as a Brexit advisor for the last 3 years, helping many businesses with the issues. I mean, it does work in its own way, but you have issues there, Nigel, where you've got so many things that are in the way now because you've got a customs territory. That creates delays in itself. And please remember, everybody, on the 1st of January this year, we've got huge issues because obviously the transition period stops for the UK. So goods coming into the UK will have far more stringent tests, border controls, etc. So there's a huge challenge ahead for the government on the 1st of January. That's one thing. Secondly, the just-in-time, yes, it can work, but you have to go more digital. And the government has to invest in that. It has to look at the supply chain, how it's working.
Yes.
And they can make this work now. They can make it work. They just have to understand how supply chain links, how it all works together. Once you understand that, you can get it working.
Yeah, and actually, the truth of it is with imports of goods, there isn't someone checking every container. No, digitisation clearly is the way forward. Well, Richard, I'm sorry you've got COVID. I'm sorry your New Year's Eve has been ruined. But a last comment from you. Is this fiasco that we're facing now, is it all the government's fault, in your opinion? I
think they have to take some blame. I think they have to really start looking at how they organise and how they look at the supply chain and not just looking at it on the day when there's a problem. I think they need to address it and they need to plan ahead.
I think you answered that very diplomatically, but I fully understood what you meant. And I wish you a happy new year. And thank you. Well, yes, I think it is a real fiasco. Now, coming up, Hong Kong shuts down the last prominent pro-democracy news outlet. Is this the end of press freedom in Hong Kong? What does the future hold even for foreign journalists reporting? But first, here is the always gloomy weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Exceptionally mild as we approach 2022 for New Year's Eve. Most of the rain will wane, it will fade, but it is going to be a windy one. Now, all courtesy of an area of low pressure, which is still with us, delivering cloud, rain and stronger winds as we head through the next 24 hours and also beyond. This weather front here stalls across more central and northern parts of the country as we head through this evening and overnight, with some high rainfall totals for the Lake District as well as Dumfries and Galloway, and some moderate bursts to come through the evening and overnight for Northern Ireland, with showers to follow. And then rain returns to Wales and the West Country. A strong wind associated with this, and this wet weather by tomorrow morning will be sitting across central southern England and the Midlands, clearing quite quickly towards the southeast. And that bodes well for England and Wales through the day on New Year's Eve. Some brighter skies, although it will be blustery. Now across central and southern parts of Scotland, as well as northern England, the rain here tends to die out in situ. So some drier skies, still a lot of cloud. Brighter skies across the far northeast of Scotland, and temperatures typically coming in around 9 to 14, 15 degrees Celsius. Certainly mild across England and Wales, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, through New Year's Eve evening, many areas seeing dry weather, although it will be rather cloudy. The winds then pick up some strength across Irish seacoast as more rain comes in across the northwest of the country, and then more rain arrives across more southern parts as we head into New Year's Day. So New Year's Day will dawn bright for some, mild for most, and also windy. Through the day, this showery rain extends from western Scotland towards Wales, northwest England, as well as central southern England. So through the day, yes, you may see some showery bursts. Either side, though, some brighter conditions, but always that fresh wind, which will be strong towards the northwest. And temperatures again will be on the milder side. However, turning colder from the north and very windy on Sunday in the south.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. You need to get your lateral flow test. The trouble is, they're not available because demand has spiked and we hadn't pre-ordered enough. It is a fiasco. Is it the government's fault, is the question I put to you. Some of your replies that have come in. Dan says, people take too many tests in England. They're obsessed with it. Well, yes, because they've been told to by the government. Ifion says, the government have scared people into testing constantly and now they can't cope. Well, I think actually fear is something they've used quite effectively ever since the beginning of this pandemic. I don't mean that in a good way. Peter says, don't blame the government for the shortage of lateral flow tests. Blame those that refuse to be vaccinated. I'm sorry, that's got nothing to do with it. Even if you've been jabbed 100 times, you can still catch the Omicron variant. Don't delude yourself into thinking just because you've had the booster that you can't catch this virus, because you can. Karen says, this should come as no surprise, but forward planning is not a word in their vocabulary. However, I have no doubt somebody will be rewarded for yet another failure. Well, of course, we do have the New Year's honours list, which will be announced tomorrow, and I'm sure there'll be a few failures there that do well. Now, on to more serious subject, a much more serious subject, and one that I do wonder sometimes why we don't talk about this a lot more. But overnight in Hong Kong, we've seen one of the last pro-democracy news outlets, Stan News, have been shut down. And it's the usual, exactly as you would expect, masses of Chinese police invading the building, taking out the computers, taking out all of the records, arresting several people, journalists mostly, including one who even held a Canadian passport, which is interesting. This, of course, follows the even higher profile Apple Daily, which was shut, with Jimmy Lai being arrested. And this is part of a pattern, in fact, that has been rapidly increasing over the course of the last year or so. And I have to say, every agreement that was made that up until 2047 there would be autonomy within Hong Kong, every one of those agreements is being broken by the Chinese Communist Party. And it really does look to me, although free speech and democracy has gone, and I'm not actually sure whether there's really any prospect of getting it back. And yet, given that it is a former British colony, given that we did that deal with the Chinese Communist Party, and given that we've actually opened up the door potentially to quite a lot of Hong Kongese to come in to this country, it is amazing in these circumstances that the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, you know, the one that's favourite to take over from Boris Johnson, do you know what she said? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yet Antony Blinken, Biden's Secretary of State, has put out quite a strong condemnation. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Benedict Rogers, the CEO of Hong Kong Watch. And Benedict, someone that lived, worked in Hong Kong. But I understand you were a sort of early warning shot because you were denied entry to Hong Kong some years ago. What was your crime?
Well, my crime was to have spoken the truth and criticised the regime in Beijing, stood up for democracy and freedom in Hong Kong. And I went on a visit in October 2017 just to meet old friends and was told I was not welcome and put back on a plane.
It literally stopped at the border, put back on a plane?
Absolutely.
And had you written articles or broadcast, or what had you done?
Those are the worst of my crimes. I'd written articles, I'd spoken to MPs, I'd hosted people like Joshua Wong and Nathan Law in London and introduced them to MPs.
So, Stan News, was it pretty much one of the last outlets that was arguing for democracy and free speech?
It was, very, very much so. And I would say that if the closure of the Apple Daily 6 months ago was perhaps the death or the death knell of press freedom, the closure of Stan News is probably the burial of press freedom.
Yeah, I mean, Apple did get quite a lot of publicity because of Jimmy Lai. This has had some, but given our level of responsibility, given that we actually did this deal, I feel far, far too little. Now, I mentioned the fact in my talk-up that one of the people arrested also possessed a Canadian passport. So, clearly, if you're from Hong Kong, you're Chinese, you can't speak freely without the fear of being arrested. But what is the situation now, in your opinion, for foreign journalists based in Hong Kong who are reporting out to a wider world, either by writing for a big national newspaper, or what about even, I could be a British businessman living in Hong Kong, putting stuff out on Twitter. What are the implications for that?
The implications are very grave. And if I can just say, first of all, that not only was one of the people arrested a Canadian, one of the other people arrested, a very prominent barrister, Margaret Ng, actually has a British passport. And all the more reason why Liz Truss should be speaking out, and her silence is deafening. But in terms of journalists, there have already been a few foreign correspondents who've had their work visas denied or not renewed. And I think it's only going to get worse. We see the harassment of foreign correspondents in mainland China, and I think that's to come in Hong Kong.
But in a way, one of the liberating things about the internet, and it certainly helped my career because I could get round the back of mainstream media and deliver a message directly to an audience. To what extent can China control, shut down the internet?
Well, I think it certainly can. Whether it will go the whole way in terms of imposing its what's known as the Great Firewall of China in Hong Kong, or whether it will be more targeted, taking down certain websites, blocking them, going after people who've posted or tweeted things, I don't know. But some of that targeted harassment is already happening. And one thing I should add to your earlier question is, of course, the very draconian national security law actually has an extraterritorial component to it. So certainly if you're a foreigner living in Hong Kong and you tweet something, I mean, having a foreign passport is not going to protect you. But even in theory, I'm breaking the national security law, as are you, probably every day, sitting here in London. Now, they're unlikely to be able to reach us here, but nevertheless, it does have extraterritorial.
And sedition is what Stan News were accused of.
That's right.
And what is their definition of sedition? Any criticism?
Pretty much any criticism. I mean, all Stan News did was to report stories that any decent media organisation would do, interview people who are critical of the regime, publish op-eds by critics. That's sedition.
So that's basically what you're saying, Benedict, is there's no way back.
I think there's no way back unless something fundamental changes in the regime in Beijing. In the short term, it's very hard to see things improving in Hong Kong.
I'm afraid I rather agree with that. Now, one of the reasons for the silence, and I'm not particularly putting Liz Truss in the frame here directly, but it is fascinating. You know, I've sat here, and in that chair has sat Vince Cable, Stanley Johnson, pillars of the British establishment who are extremely loath to be critical of the communist regime. Yes, they'll criticise a bit, but not really critical. And I've been fascinated. Overnight we learned that Huawei, that great communications company, have actually given twice as much funding to British universities as previous figures had been published. A further £28.7 million has been taken up by 9 leading UK universities. That's on top of the money we understood they'd taken before. So what we see are Chinese companies, and there's no such thing as an independent Chinese company in a communist state, and we know that and we get that, giving money directly through academia, putting on its advisory boards former senior politicians, former big businessmen, former civil servants. I mean, it feels to me, and you know, you may say that I'm being a bit over the top, but it feels to me like there are significant sections of the British establishment who effectively are bought and paid for, and that's why they're so quiet.
I agree with you. It certainly feels that way to me. And if you remember, at the start of 2020, Boris Johnson and the British government were seriously proposing to give Huawei the major role in 5G. Now, thankfully, there was a strong parliamentary rebellion over that. There was also pressure from our US and Australia and other friends.
There was a phone call from Donald Trump.
There was.
I'd love to have overheard the language that was used on that one.
Absolutely. But no, I mean, on a more positive note, what I would say is that in the last few years, I think we have seen a shift, certainly in Parliament, maybe not so much in Whitehall, in that a few years ago, the voices in Parliament speaking out on this were very few. Now there are, across the spectrum, from Ian Duncan-Smith to Tom Tugendhat to people on the Labour and Lib Dem benches. So that's encouraging.
Well, and I think in the country too. Yeah. I think this is one of those issues where actually Westminster and the media are behind public opinion. Yeah. I think the Western world has woken up and has got real concerns about China. I think British consumers would like to buy fewer Chinese goods if they can, but it's quite difficult when you go on Amazon and order something because you don't know where it's been manufactured. And I think this is an issue in American politics now that has become very significant, and it will grow here, I think, too. Thank you very much indeed, Benedict, for coming in and sharing your knowledge, although it is, I have to say, a pretty depressing tale. But thank you very much. Indeed. Now, we've talked there about the extent to which the Chinese Communist Party are cracking down on free speech, are being authoritarian in every way. Yet in this country, what I'm about to tell you goes completely the opposite way, because my what the Farage moment was when I saw the news this morning that just brace yourself for this. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's true. 92 convicted terrorists are now being assessed for parole, being assessed for early release. It is absolutely, truly astonishing. And I'm talking about people such as the man who plotted the attacks alongside the London Bridge. Horror story. I'm talking about somebody who was an associate of Salman Abedi, the man that blew up that bomb at the Manchester arena. I mean, this stuff is just unbelievable. I'm talking about a man who plotted to bomb Bluewater. I'm talking about a neo-Nazi who produced a pipe bomb. I mean, I'm talking about all these people, and yet they're possibly coming up for parole. And that really is, I think, very concerning, because we have seen instance after instance where this goes wrong. In November 2019, Usman Khan attacked and killed 2 people and injured 3 others before being shot dead by police officers. Khan had served 8 years in prison after being convicted for planning terrorist attacks. And he's not the only one. So we must have gone literally soft in the head if we think that all of these people, and the vast majority of them, have been convicted of jihadi terrorism. Do we really think, after spending time in our prisons, which we know have become increasingly radicalised, that somehow these men have changed their mind? I don't think so, but I'm afraid, once again, we're up against our old friend, the Human Rights Act, and a legal system that works off the back of it. And I think the first duty of government is to protect its citizens and to even contemplate, over the course of the next few months, releasing 92 convicted terrorists. Frankly, absolutely beggars belief. Now, in a moment, joining me on Talking Pints is somebody who came to this country as a political refugee and is now a creator on YouTube. You may not know what that is, but you're about to find out when Maya Toosey joins me.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
It's that time of the day. The GB News pub has been declared open. It is Talking Pints. Now, before I introduce my guest this evening, I was at the osteopath's the other day, and he was chatting to me. He said, do you know, he's like, had a patient the other day who said they were a blogger. What's a blogger? Well, today I've got somebody who's a blogger, a creator. I don't know. He may even be an influencer for all I know, but I'm joined by Maya Toosey. Maya, welcome.
Welcome. Is it too late to say Merry Christmas or...?
Well, I know it's never too late to say that. And let's hope for a better 22.
Absolutely.
So, Maya, before we get to this bizarre world, I say bizarre, actually, to your generation and younger, this is just how they live, it's what they understand, and it influences the clothes people buy, it influences how people vote, it influences what books they read. in absolutely every way, and it's growing and growing and growing. But there are some censorship threats, and we'll talk about that too. But firstly, you are one of the youngest people I've had on Talking Pints. Your background is fascinating. Born in Iran.
Yes, in Tehran, capital, yeah.
Which once was a great country.
Yeah, used to be a secular, free market capitalist country with constitutional monarchy. Obviously, some flaws. It wasn't a perfect system, but everything changed. And since then, my parents' family got into trouble. Yes. My mother had to come here as a political refugee, a proper political refugee. And then I came as a kid. Of course, under 18, I was allowed to basically come after to join her.
So you are effectively a political refugee?
Technically, I can't take too much credit because I'm a child of a.
You were a
refugee.
minor,
but yeah, technically speaking, yeah, I didn't go through the process because obviously my mum had to kind of explain the case and everything else. Yeah, but I came here. Yeah.
And you can't go back to Iran. You've been cancelled, I believe.
I have been cancelled by Iran. Yes, I'm not allowed to go back, and partly, the obvious reason that obviously we are here, but also because I'm active in politics and media. Yes. They believe that apparently they called me an MI6 Tory Asian, because if you're a Tory, back in the day when I was part of the Tory party, you're definitely an MI6 agent. It goes hand in hand, clearly.
Well, they're probably right for all we know.
I mean, I can't really say if it is, even if it's true. I can't say.
So your family have benefited, you've benefited, as a result that we've been a country that for centuries, and nobody in Europe dares talk to us about this, over centuries we have actually offered genuine refugee status to lots of people. When you see what's happening in the English Channel right now, how do we deal with that?
Well, it's tricky, but in terms of before even dealing with it, one of the interesting things I've discovered, because obviously on YouTube I make videos about it, and on Twitter a lot of people attack me. A lot of the so-called kind of white liberal lefties who tell me that, why are you complaining? These people look like you, so you should support them. You should just bring everybody here.
Isn't racism a funny thing?
It's funny, yeah. But the interesting thing is that they say, well, it's the likes of Nigel Farage that should complain. They complain, yeah, the white native English. Well, actually, it's mostly the proper integrated refugees and migrants who are here, including first wave. These are the people who are complaining more about the illegal migrants. You just don't hear about it, of course. They're part of the silent majority. They don't really go on TV. They don't get invited by BBC or Sky to go on TV and talk about how, as a legal migrant, I don't like illegal migration. But it's true.
Now, I'm interested, you came and lived in South London, Lewisham, you grew up, and I'm interested in your political epiphany. Obviously being directed towards the Labour Party, because kind of Lewisham's a Labour area, and I've no doubt at school, etc., there were influences perhaps sending you in that direction. So tell me what happened with your engagement with the Labour Party.
I do believe that growing up in Lewisham, that made me not be Labour, because the pressure, the mob rule mentality, the peer pressure that they said, well, this is the Labour heartland. And obviously I came from an ordinary middle-class family in Iran. Yeah. So that meant good education, but that also meant when we came here, ended up in a council estate, which was a bit of a culture shock, but kind of more regressive. So I was like, oh, this is interesting, so I'm going to get used to a new environment. But everything I saw, for me and my family, we were just happy that we're embracing this new culture because they gave us a fresh chance, a fresh start. Everybody in the neighbourhood, well, as a whole, were complaining, saying this is the worst country in the world, we're all dying, this is the end of the world as we know it. And everybody was just complaining. And people like my family, this type of, if you want to call them migrants or refugees or just humans, we don't see ourselves as victims. Everything is an opportunity. Even if you're at the bottom, when they're coming here, starting, fresh on a council estate, I had to do everything from scratch. But I didn't complain. I didn't believe that, well, the bankers are rich, so I'm not going to get rich. But I got out of it. But that made me realize that it was always inside me, the kind of the free market capitalist side of me, that kind of believe in, but also in terms of embracing the British culture and being proud of being British.
Yeah, I mean, look, actually, to be fair to the Labour Party, for much of its history, it was a very patriotic political party. And one of the reasons it's gone wrong and lost that northern wall is it lost that connection. It kind of lost its way with patriotism, with border controls, with things like that. So as a free market conservative, and now somebody who is a political creator.
YouTuber.
You're a YouTuber. You are a YouTuber. Yeah. So come on, explain to an audience who may not understand this, What do you do for a living, Martuzi?
Apparently, it's a job. A lot of people in my family still don't believe like that. You can't make money, right?
So come on, what do you do?
Essentially, it is. It's an online.
And why
news
do you
channel.
do it? And why do you do it?
But that's the thing. Like yourself, and people like yourself, that you kind of focused on the political left behind.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered a couple of years ago, that there is also such thing as media left behind, in terms of the left behind who are also being let down by the mainstream media, the old kind of legacy types of channels. And it was the height of Brexit negotiation, it was Theresa May. And I just randomly started, I was getting frustrated with everything that we were getting from the news. So I just decided to make videos to kind of simplify things and kind of make things more easier to kind of just relate to and give the facts, but be open to people about my own biases and say, so these are the facts, this is my opinion, now form your own view. And it took off, and people actually then stopped watching your legacy channels, and there was a gap in the market, and this is obviously before GBNews, obviously, that broke through, and there's a revolution now. But that became the go-to source for a lot of people around the country. I got more views than certain other channels, the legacy channels.
You've got about 250,000 people that follow you on YouTube, and you've had over 100 million video views, which is a big number. So can a person like you earn a good living doing that?
Yes, it's possible. It's it feels like we're going to have to release my tax. No, is there?
No, because there are a lot of people out there now, not necessarily in politics, but in fashion, in art, in all of these things. There are a lot of people out there who are, it seems, earning their living. You get by, you do okay doing this.
Yes, but I have had my issues with YouTube as well, quite recently, because whilst we complain, people like me, the alternative media guys, that they're all Ofcom and all the there are a lot of restrictions with kind of the real world. YouTube, they have massive restrictions. So if you say the wrong thing accidentally, or it comes out the wrong way, the system, the kind of the AI that they have, and also the people who actually monitor it, they could bring you down any moment. The channel could go, and there was a period quite recently where my channel got hit. And so, while it could be good, the good days where I could make a lot of money and I could actually influence people, actually give them what they want to hear, but it could go away any moment. It could get cancelled.
This is the scary thing, isn't it? Because, and I was talking about this with our guest from Hong Kong Watch earlier. When social media first arrived, it was liberating because it was a way of getting round the back of what the mainstream wanted to present, going directly to people. And I don't think the political revolution of 2016 could have happened without social media. In my case, it was YouTube.
Yes.
It was my speeches in the European Parliament, reaching a big audience in Britain. Suddenly people knew, walking down the street, who I was. That's what did it for me. For Trump, it was Twitter. Direct communication out to 50, 60, 70 million Americans. It didn't matter what CNN said. He was having that direct conversation. And it almost seems to me that the people that created this stuff on the west coast of America suddenly became horrified about what the impact of it had been. And we now see Trump himself, of course, is banned. You're kind of saying that, in a sense, you have to be careful about individual words because they're the triggers. I mean, where are we going with this?
It is tricky. You mentioned 2016 and yourself in terms of the platform you got and Trump with Twitter. There was also another one, Arab Spring. The Egyptian protest and revolution actually happened on Facebook. It was because of Facebook organising the groups and events and things like that. So it's been happening for a few years. Where we go now, and you're absolutely right that, for example, the big tech kind of liberal left establishment, they realised, we created a good thing, but we're actually also giving a kind of chance to our opponents, people we don't like, to be empowered. And now they're freaking out. It's sort of like what the CCP would do in China, where the Chinese Communist Party will want to control things. But that makes more sense. They're communist and authoritarian. Why are the kind of so-called liberal, big tech, open and kind of tolerant society that we have, they want to shut down someone like me or yourself or Trump on Twitter? You mentioned words. You can't say COVID. When COVID started, the first lockdown, I couldn't use the word COVID. I had to say the health crisis or the lockdown situation.
Really?
You can't say certain words, you just get demonetized. You can't say war. Even if you say, I hate war, the context doesn't matter. So you have to use, there was a video I did, it was about, obviously, it was a context about Germany, Second World War. So I had to say, What happened in Germany back in the 1940s and when they got rid of their tyrant? I couldn't say certain words. I couldn't even say Hitler. So that's where we are.
Are there going to be other companies that come along and start to provide alternatives? I mean, there are one or two that are trying, aren't there?
Yeah, and I think there are like alternatives to Twitter. There's like a new app called Getter.
Parole, got Rumble. There are attempts being made.
The problem is, so some of them have already failed, and some of them actually still going really well. I think the way you kind of counter it, and for example, the new apps like Getter, getting it right, is you can't sell yourself as the right-wing version of Twitter or right-wing version of YouTube, because accidentally you will create an echo chamber. It has to be sold as we are basically going to be the alternative mainstream.
A bit like the Brexit vote.
Basically.
Well, yeah, but it brought in millions of Labour voters that most people in London didn't really understand. You were a member of the Conservative Party.
Not anymore.
You believe in free markets.
Yep.
You believe in aspiration. You believe in low tax. He sounds like Boris's nightmare, doesn't he, really? So when did you leave?
I used to be an active member for 10 years ago. I joined, and
you stood as a candidate.
Kind of classic student activist, local members, stood as council candidates, and as a young kind of politico and Tory, you think, well, the only route is I should become an MP. Then I worked in Parliament for a bit, and Westminster, and I realised, that's not a good idea. When you see what happened in the bubble, firstly, there's no money. There's no actual influence unless you become really prime minister, and because you could have influence depending on what you are and what you're about. For example, Steve Baker, Mark Harper, these guys like backbenchers, they have influence for certain areas as campaigns. But I got out because I realised I'm just getting too old for that. I'm not going to just keep waiting and waiting for something because I kept seeing a lot of my friends who thought that the only way you could actually influence in terms of the world and politics and everything else is part of politics. You don't have to.
No, there are lots and lots of ways.
Yeah, media is...
So how do you feel about the party now, the direction it's taking?
Problem I have with the party is not necessarily just the fault is like Boris Johnson's leadership is like not going well or their policies. That's clearly a problem now. But there's a deeper problem with the whole system, from Tory HQ to the culture of Toryism. The one thing they will credit to the Tories, the whole party is based on just survival and winning and kind of maintaining power.
And adapting.
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes they have to then do the right things to win. For example, they eventually had to get Brexit done.
Yeah, they had to. I mean, they were very reluctant.
But that was thanks to a different political party that was created to push for that.
if they hadn't done that, the Brexit party could have won the next election, and they weren't going to allow that. Maya, finally, a message, please, to youngsters watching this who fancy their chances as being YouTubers, creators. How do they start?
Don't do it. don't aim for it. It's just one of those things where you can't really plan it. Mine was very accidental, but they should definitely, I would encourage attempts to get your voices heard. Because obviously my platform is to give some sort of voice to people who are not being heard. But I want to encourage other people to tweet more, write more blogs. And even if only a few people read it or watch YouTube videos, still do it, because we need the silent majority to actually stop being silent, basically.
On that note, and one that I absolutely concur with, because when the silent majority spoke in 2016, look what the result was. That was Maya Toosey on Talking Pints. And thank you for coming in. We've come to the end of the show, but I've saved a few minutes because, of course, it is Barrage the Farage, and I've kept Maya here as backup, just in case I get some real rotters that are difficult to answer. Number one, Cynthia asks me, what is your New Year's resolution? Well, I used to joke about this, Cynthia. I used to say every year that I was having a debate what was to go, drinking or driving, and driving lost. But that's an old one. My New Year's resolution is to do dry January. Okay, so you'll see me here from the 3rd, I guess, with, I don't know what it's going to be yet. Ginger beer, I suppose, something like that. I don't know. Adrian asks, surely all terrorists should be locked up forever? Well, I guess that depends what they're actually convicted of. Did you see that story, Maya, that 92 people are coming up for parole?
Yep.
Have we gone soft in the head?
Not just soft, completely insane.
Thank you. Thank you. There we are. You see how moderate I am on this programme. Trevor asks, out of the US and China, Which, in your opinion, is the strongest country right now? Well, with Biden's leadership and with Biden's catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the way that China has responded to that with its bellicose noises over Taiwan, with the games that Putin is playing, and I believe they are games actually, on the Ukrainian border, whilst at the same time we become ever more reliant on him for gas. It's still just about America, because technologically and militarily they are still massively stronger than China. But economically, China is going to overtake them within the course of the next few years. And that is a real concern that I have. Anthony asks, when will people start pointing out the hypocrisy of football players going to the Qatar World Cup? I mean, they take the knee, they virtue signal, and they're off to a regime that is brutal, isn't it, to homosexuals, to all sorts of people. Maya, what do you make of it?
Okay, it's going to sound controversial, but genuinely, because I've come from that culture.
Yeah.
But the lefties, the Middle East, Qatar, for example, they can't really criticize them. They can't attack them for being, oh, you're a homophobe, because they're also brown, like me. So they're like, oh, no,
there we are.
Attack a brown person.
That's their way out. Right, I tell you what, folks, we're pretty much there. Why have you not made the New Year's honours list, I'm asked? I never will be. They owe me far too much ever to admit it. Right, I'm done for the rest of the year. Happy New Year to all of you. Coming up next, it's GB News Live with Darren McCaffrey. First, though, the weather. Happy New Year.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Exceptionally mild as we approach 2022 for New Year's Eve. Most of the rain will wane, it will fade, but it is going to be a windy one. Now, all courtesy of an area of low pressure, which is still with us, delivering cloud, rain and stronger winds as we head through the next 24 hours and also beyond.